What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Brave and Faithful podcast. Today, I have another Army National Guard veteran. He's also the author of the book Surviving Son, where he talks about his journey in the military and his deployment. I have none other than Scott DeLuzio. Scott, how you doing, brother?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
But again, we're talking offline. Thanks for taking the time to share a little bit about your story. Um, so let's talk about your service. To begin with, I mentioned you were in the Army National Guard. How long did you serve for, and where did you deploy to? Can you just share a little bit about that with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the National Guard mostly because after 9/11, my I wanted to join the military. But I was in college at the time when nine
Mm,
eleven happened, and I wanted to just drop out of college and join the military right then and there. And I realized if no, just knowing myself, if I was to do that, I would never go back to college. Right, so I would never finish what I started. And so I said, okay, I'm a couple years in already. Let me just stick with it. I'm almost there, so I'll stick with it. I'll finish up, and chances are it's the whatever military response to 9/11 wasn't going to be a quick in and out like Desert Storm was, or
yeah.
whatever. So I was like, okay, whatever is going on, it's going to be there when I get out of college, most likely. And if not, then oh well, I missed my turn. Um, then I get out of college, and my brother, my younger brother, he joined the Vermont Army National Guard. He was going to school up in Vermont at the time, and he just got to know a guy who was in the guard, and he sounded like, hey, this is something that I kind of want to do. And growing up, we grew up in a very patriotic family, and we always looked up to the military, respected the military, first responders, all that kind of stuff. And like overnight, my little brother became one of these guys that I grew up looking up to, and it was like one of these kind of weird situations in our lives, right? So I was super proud of him and everything. And I was like, okay, I started to revisit that thought of, gee, maybe I should join the military too. Um, and then about a year after he joined the military, I heard a report in the news that said that the military was struggling to meet their recruiting numbers. And that started to piss me off. I was like, where are all those people from 9/11 who were ready to move mountains to go get payback against, this enemy and everything? And why aren't they joining the military? And then I realized I was those people, and I still hadn't done anything.
Mm,
And so,
yeah.
so I said, you know what? I'm young enough. I'm fit enough. I'm perfectly capable of joining the military. Heck, if my younger brother could do it, then I'm not going to let him one up me either.
Right.
So of course I'm going to be able to do it. Um, so I decided to join then, and so I ended up staying in the guard for almost 6 years. Um, and I deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, and that was a deployment where so I was in the Connecticut Army National Guard. My brother, like I said, was in the Vermont Army National Guard, and both of our units somehow wound up in the under the same brigade. There's some reorganization of the units and everything, and so we ended up on the same brigade. And when we were deployed to Afghanistan, it was a brigade-wide deployment. So my brother's unit was deployed, and mine as well, all at the same time. So he and I were both over there in Afghanistan at the same time. Um,
How long were you guys
and
there for? Like a year or?
yeah, well, the deployment was supposed to be a year, and it got cut short for me, and I guess for him too. He was killed in action in August of that year, so that was about 6 or 7 months or so after we got into Afghanistan. And after that, I was sent home, and
Mm,
I didn't return to Afghanistan after that. The rest of the unit was still there for a few more months, and then they came home as well. Um, but after he was killed, I was sent home pretty much right away. Like I think the next morning, I was on a flight out of Afghanistan, which actually happened to be the same flight that he was on. It was the cargo plane that took him, and there's another fallen soldier as well.
Wow.
Took both of them out of there to Kuwait, and so I was able to escort him at least as far as Kuwait out of Afghanistan. So, so that was something that I was glad I was able to be there for. They, for anyone who's ever been on one of those flights, there's usually a ceremony beforehand called the ramp ceremony where they bring
Yeah.
on the fallen service members, and then they have like a little bit of a ceremony. People come and pay their respects. There's high-ranking, generals and things like that come and pay their respects, and it felt good to me to be able to be there as part of that, as a family member, to be able to be there and represent him in that way. So, it was a crappy situation, but it felt good in a way too to be there for him. And when I couldn't be there for him when he really needed me, but I was able to at least
At
do
the
that
end,
for
you were
him.
there for him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so you were, just correct me if I'm wrong, but you were sent back because, you guys, you two were brothers, and he
Mhm.
was killed in action, and so you two were the only two, I guess, children of, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so he and I were the only two kids my parents had.
Right.
So yeah, I was sent home. I don't know if it necessarily was because of that, that I was like the only son left for my parents or anything, but I think it was one of those things where they sort of realized that I wasn't going to be very much good there anymore.
Yeah.
After that had happened, and the day that my brother was killed, actually, just about 20 minutes after I found out that he was killed, our own unit was in a firefight as well, and so.
Wow.
So that was an incredibly stressful and traumatic day for me. But in addition to that, when we got home, the governor of the state of Connecticut came to my brother's funeral, and so for people who aren't familiar with the National Guard and how that chain of command works, in the normal military, the president is the commander in chief, but in the National Guard, the president and the governor of whatever state you're in act as the commander in chief, depending on who you fall under. If you're actively deployed, then you're fall under the president. Otherwise, you fall under the governor. And so the governor said that she was going to basically say that I wasn't going back after all of that. So it was really kind of her call at that point where she said, there's no reason that you need to be going back over there. So I didn't end up going back.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you for telling that story, man. And my brother-in-law actually, he was enlisted in New York with the National Guard over there, and also went to Afghanistan. And I mean, I believe at that time though, like everybody was deploying, right? Like
Yeah,
even
for
though you
sure.
guys were National Guard, it seemed like you guys weren't reserve, you're still like active as far as like deployment wise was going, right?
Yeah, for sure. When I first joined the National Guard, so that was in late 2005, I went through basic training in the early part of 2006. When I got out of basic training, the unit that I joined was already deployed to Afghanistan. So
Yeah.
they were there in 2006. And then again, we deployed in 2009, late 2009, early 2010, to Afghanistan again. And as a matter of fact, that same unit just got back from Africa just a couple weeks ago, and so National Guard deploys even
Yeah.
still to this day. It's 2022, and they're still being deployed to various locations around the world. And while we pulled out of Afghanistan, there's still stuff going on, in Africa and other places around the world. So they still do deploy.
Yeah, I just wanted to let our audience who, non-military listening in, just to kind of understand, even though they are National Guard, then they might be considered reserve. I mean, especially during those times, right? The 2000s, like
Yeah.
everybody was deploying. So
Yeah, and that's what they told us when we got to basic training. It's like we were infantry, and so they said at some point you're going to
right.
be
Yeah.
deployed. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
When,
And
yeah.
and so And as a matter of fact, some people who were in our basic training unit got orders to companies that were on their way overseas, like straight out of basic training. So yeah, I mean, everyone gets deployed, at one point or another.
Yeah.
So
So you went through that deployment, and then obviously with the loss of your brother, you decided to transition out of the military after that,
yeah.
and kind of just explain to our audience, how was that shift for you leaving the military and then back into the civilian world?
Yeah, that shift was really difficult for me. And for a lot of people in the National Guard, the transition out of the military isn't so difficult because they already have civilian jobs lined up because it's just the 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year that they do the military training. So they have other jobs, right? But when I got back from Afghanistan, I was having a really hard time with just relating with people. My former coworkers that I had at the job that I was working at, I had a real hard time uh, just feeling like I fit in with them. And I had anger issues. I had a lot of just unresolved issues that were going on, and I just was not dealing with them in a very healthy way. I was not sleeping, like hardly at all. In order to get myself to go to sleep, I would drink way too much,
Mm.
and then I'd pass out. And okay, fine, check the box, I slept, but then I wake up the next morning feeling like crap. So I need to drink a ton of coffee to get myself going through the day and everything. And that was fine for a little while, but as time went on, it got worse and worse because I was drinking coffee later and later in the day, which just
Yeah.
affected my sleep even more. And it just became this vicious cycle where I just couldn't get out of it. Um, and it got to the point where my anger was so bad that I was just yelling at everyone and everything about the smallest things, like little minor inconveniences. I was just erupting into anger, and it was pretty bad. I just wasn't myself anymore. Um, and so when I decided I wanted to get out of the military, it really was because in addition, I also had a knee injury from that deployment, and I had some surgery to get it corrected, but that the recovery time meant that I was not going to be able to do any training or any basically army anything um, throughout the rest of my enlistment, to the end of my enlistment. And so I was going into training, the 1 week in a month and everything, and I felt like I was completely useless. And I was just sitting there watching everyone else go out and do their training, and I was just sitting there waiting for them to come back, and I wasn't doing anything.
Mm.
And so I felt worthless, and I was like, this is a waste of everyone's time. I don't need to be here. I'm not adding any value. I'm not doing anything really. So I wanted to see what I could do to get out of the military at that point, because it was really starting to take its toll on me, where I was just, in addition to being angry and upset all the time, I felt worthless. And so I started looking into what options I had. Um, and I found an Army regulation called Surviving Sons and Daughters, which is a provision for people like myself where a sibling or another close family member dies in the military service, so in combat or other training exercise or something like that. So I decided to put in paperwork to request discharge under Surviving Sons and Daughters regulation, which is where the title of my book Surviving Son comes from. Um, and it ended up taking, like anything with the government, took a few weeks for that
Took a
paperwork to
while.
get processed. Yeah,
Yeah.
it took a little while, but and it was at the point where I was kind of like, oh, this is just not going to go through. They're just going to deny it or whatever. I kind of just brushed it off and I forgot about it. And then one morning I got a phone call from my platoon sergeant, and he said, yeah, your paperwork's been processed and you're out. All you got to do now is just bring in any equipment that you might still have, and that's it. You're done. And so it was kind of like a light switch going off. There was no transition time. It was like I went to bed the night before, I still technically was a soldier, and then I woke up the next morning and boom, all of a sudden I'm not anymore. And so there's a big loss of identity at that point, where I had identified very closely with with being a service member, with through the deployment and everything like that. It just was something that kind of became a part of me. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, now it's gone and I don't have that anymore. So that was something else that I had to sort of reconcile too, is now, in addition to all the other issues I'm having now, I'm not even sure who I am anymore. You know, I had a son was born just before I went to Afghanistan, and I came back and I didn't really feel like a father because my wife seemed like she had everything
You were
nailed
gone for
down, and
so
she,
long. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I didn't know what I was doing, and you know, I kind of felt like I didn't really know what to do. I felt like a fish out of water, and so all of this identity stuff was going on with me, and I was just not having a great time processing all of the stuff that was going on, in addition to the PTSD from combat and the you know, the grief of losing my brother, and you know, going from having a brother to not having a brother. There's all these transitions that were taking place in my life in a very short period of time, all within a few months of each other, and it was really hard for me to process all of that stuff all at once.
Yeah. So Scott, it seems to me, just from what you're describing, right? A lot of our military members transitioning to civilian world or experience something similar, right? Whereas they might not have lost, a brother or whatnot, but just the things that you describe, right? Like not feeling a sense of belonging or post-traumatic stress and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
what would your advice be for anyone that were in your shoes uh, then, right? Like, what advice would you give them as far as making that shift, making that transition?
Yeah.
Maybe,
So
maybe not easier, but a little less painful.
yeah, to soften the blow a little bit
Yeah.
of all that, right? I think it's important to find something that is bigger than yourself, to give back to and serve, continue serving, even though you're out of the military, but you continue to serve in a way that is fulfilling to you. And that could be any number of things. You know, like I do my podcast, the Drive On podcast, where I talk to other military veterans, and I try to help the people in the military community. That's something to me that's bigger than myself. It's not just me doing something for me; it's me doing something for somebody else. Um, you can volunteer at a retirement home, or at in a school, or you know, volunteer with kids, or uh, something. Just find something that you're passionate about,
Yeah.
and go in and do something with that. It doesn't have to be volunteer work necessarily. It could be, but it could be something that you're passionate about, and you want to do that for a career after the military. Maybe your passion is animals, like dogs and cats and that kind of thing. Maybe you go and you work at a veterinarian's office, or at a animal shelter or something like that, right? So there's a number of different things that you can do, but you find that new purpose in life, because we all had a very big purpose when we served in the military, whether you deployed or not, whether you saw combat or not. No matter what you did, you were serving your country, which,
Right.
I don't care who you are, that's a pretty big purpose. That's a pretty big thing that you're serving there. And then all of a sudden, now you're out of that mode. You're not serving your country anymore, and it feels like nothing you do really stacks up to that anymore. So you got to find something to do to uh, find that sense of purpose and meaning in your life again.
So, you mentioned the podcast, kind of like, let's segue into that, right?
Sure.
Your second service now, right? Like,
Right.
tell the audience a little bit about, how long has the podcast been out, the Drive On podcast, and what kind of led you to starting the podcast?
Yeah. So the podcast has been around for about 2.5 years now. I think we're at about 150 some odd episodes, somewhere around there now. And what led me to start it really was just some of the people that I had served with, people I've been overseas with, or just served with on stateside here when we came back home. They started taking their own lives, due to PTSD or other stresses that they're going through. I don't know all the specific details of all of them, but um, you know, I started thinking to myself, this is just unsatisfactory. One is too many, but then when the second one you hear about, and then more and more and more start coming in, and it's like, what's going on here? We just came back from a place where people literally wanted to kill us, and we all made it,
Right.
and we all made it just fine, that without a scratch on us. And then we came home where everyone wants us to thrive and do well, and here we are losing people, and that just wasn't okay with me. So I said, I don't want to just sit around doing nothing about this. I want to do something to try to help the veterans, the people, not just the people I know, because I started realizing that this was a widespread problem. There were people all over the military community who were struggling with any number of issues, and they weren't getting the help that they needed. So I wanted to reach as many people as possible. And I thought, what better way than starting a podcast, because that could be listened to from pretty much anywhere in the world, as long as you have an internet connection, right? So I said, let's start the podcast. And really the goal for it is to a couple of things. One is to share stories of other veterans who have struggled with things like PTSD or substance abuse or homelessness or job issues, whatever, and talk about how they overcame those issues. And uh, and really, it's designed to give hope to other people who might be listening, who might feel like they're all alone in whatever it is that they're going through, that they're struggling with, trying to find a job after getting out of the military. It's like, you're not the only one who's struggling with that. There's been other people with that issue too, and so there's people who come on and talk about all the things that they've been through. But then we also talk to the providers of services, other like nonprofits and things like that, who are serving the veteran community, and we do that to give options to people who maybe don't want to go to the VA, or tried the VA, it didn't work for them, or whatever, and just to give them another option so that they don't just give up hope and say, well, I tried everything. I went to the VA and I tried everything they had to offer and it didn't work for me. So I guess I'm a lost cause, right? That's not true. There's so many options out there, so many different organizations doing things in creative, innovative kind of ways, and it just makes it so much uh, better for those people, because now they have hope, and it gives them options uh, to keep fighting, to live another day, and see what tomorrow will bring.
Yeah, and I think to your point too is everything nowadays is so accessible with social media
Yeah,
and platforms such as having a podcast. There's just so many nonprofits, organizations, companies in general that are very supportive of the military. Uh, you know, if there's something for everyone out there.
there is.
It's just on us to basically kind of look for those opportunities, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I know a lot of people, when that I've talked to, when they get out of the military, they go through, the military has a brief class that they
Right. The
send you through. Yeah, to
transition assistance. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And they tell you all the programs and all the services that are available out there, but they tell you in such a short period of time. It's like drinking from a fire hose.
Right. Right.
It's like you're never going to get it all, right? So uh, not to say that it's a useless exercise to go through, because I'm sure it works for some people, um, but for some people, they go through that thinking to themselves, I'm going to be fine, I don't need all this stuff, I don't. So they're not even really paying too close attention to it. And then when they get out 6 months later, they're like, oh crap, what was that thing that they were telling me about?
Right.
And they forget all about it. So there's lots of resources through the government, through nonprofits, through other organizations um, that we can highlight, and we can have as a resource out there for people to be like, you know what, I needed that. Where was that 6 months ago when I first got out? And now they hear about it on the podcast, or in different publications or whatever that people might share. But it is just another way to get those resources out there to people.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too is sometimes you kind of get in our own way whenever we need to ask for help.
Right.
Um, we're we're a little stubborn, prideful at times, and we're especially guys, right? Like we like to say, I'm good," and then next thing you know, it's like everything is just too much,
Yeah.
and it's hopefully it's not too late whenever they do ask for help. But
Right.
like you said, all that stuff that you get when those transition assistance programs, like you said, a lot of that stuff is information overload, and you will not get all the information you need in that short amount of time.
Yeah,
So it's always good to reach back out to those people or those organizations, or
for
any
sure.
organization out there that can help you. um, so Scott, I want to transition into your book, Surviving Son, right?
Right.
um, what what led you to first off write this book, and like tell our audience about what this book is about and what it means to you.
Yeah, sure. So the book, there's a couple of reasons really why I wrote the book. When I first came back from Afghanistan, I started just journaling things that had happened the way I remembered them at that time, because I knew our memories are tricky and they play tricks on us over
Yeah.
time, and we start to forget things or remember things differently. Anyways, like you may not have a clear picture 10, 15, 20 years after an event took place. So I knew at some point, like I said before, I had a son, and now I have three kids. But I knew at some point my kids would be curious about what I did over in Afghanistan and what happened to their uncle and things like that. And so I wanted to write things down the way I remembered them, so I didn't end up forgetting. And so I had these just notes, pages and pages of notes of stuff that I had written down. And I I thought to myself that this should be more than just notes in a notebook that I shoved in a drawer somewhere. This is a more important story than what I was giving it. Um, and one of the things that I talk about in the book is when I first came back from Afghanistan, that day, my parents' street, all up and down their street were news vans waiting to give us for us to give an interview to them, the local television, radio, newspapers, all that kind of stuff. And I remember being so angry at them, and like I didn't want to talk to them at all. But then I realized that if we didn't tell my brother's story and what happened to him and who he was, then they were going to run a story one way or the other.
Right,
And they
right.
may just get these random sound bites from somebody in the grocery store parking lot. Oh yeah, it's sad, it's terrible, it's a tragedy, all that kind of stuff, right? And but that's just nonsense filler stuff that they're going to put in there. And so I was like, if they're going to do it, but do it right, and actually tell who he was. And so that's the other part of the story is I want I want to be able to be my brother's voice. I know he doesn't have a voice anymore because he's no longer with us, but I wanted to be able to tell his story in a way that would outlive even me, because it's now written down in a book, and it's going to be there for years and years and years to come. And so I want that for him, so that his story doesn't die with just the people who knew him. I want that to be something that lives on for years afterwards.
So how long till after that deployment, and after you transition out, did you write the book?
Yeah, so like I said, I started writing it in a way just by writing the
The
notes
journal.
down. Yeah, kind of the journaling, and that was within a couple months of coming back home that I started that. And it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years ago that I said, you know what, this needs to be more than just uh, notes. And so it was around that time, and it went through a bunch of different iterations in the whole writing process. first I was going one direction, then I was like, no, that sucks. I'm going a different direction. And so I kept going back and forth. But, at the end of the day, what I want people to be able to take away from the book is I talk a lot about the mistakes that I made uh, through my journey. And I want people to recognize that there are healthy ways to deal with things like PTSD and grief of losing a loved one. But I also want, and that's kind of more for the military and the veterans who are out there who might read the book, but for the civilians, people who haven't served before, I want them to be able to learn about the sacrifices that we make in the military, and how it affects our families, our communities, and the people that we love. Because a lot of times, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else with this, but a lot of times when you hear about a military death or a first responder, or police officer, someone like that who's killed in the line of duty on the news, you think about it and you say, oh, that's sad, that's terrible, and then you almost just forget about it. You probably remember it for the rest of the day, maybe the next day you'll remember it, but then sometimes you don't really remember, especially not the person's name, maybe not their face, or things like that. So I wanted to paint a picture of who my brother was and who he was to our family, and uh, let people know that this is a real person.
Yeah.
He had a real future. He had real people who cared for him, and the way I've written it, you almost start to get to know him a little bit, and in a way, it can kind of sting too when you get to that point where he was killed, because you kind of already knew him, and he was a nice guy. He was funny. He was personable. He always lit up the room whenever he walked in, and so you kind of get that sense about him. And then when he's taken away, it's like, oh well, this is terrible, right?
Yeah.
But and because it is terrible. And not that I'm a anti-war or anything like that, type of person, but um I want people to really think about the next war that we might send our young soldiers to go fight in, because it better damn well be worth it. Because if it's not, then what are we doing? What are these lives being lost for? Right. and
Yeah.
and that's just the nature of war. And so I want people to recognize that stuff too.
And how old was your brother when he passed?
Yeah, he was 25 years old. So, like I said, he had his whole life ahead of him. He was engaged to his high school sweetheart when he was deployed. He was planning on getting married almost a year after he was killed. They had a wedding date set and everything, and they had their whole future kind of planned out for him, and that all got ripped away. You know.
How do you, Scott? How do you want people to remember your brother and keep the soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, just like him who we lost?
You know, for my brother specifically, I think I want people to remember that, like I said before, he was this fun loving guy. He always would joke around. If you're having a bad day, he'd find a way to get under your skin to get you to laugh and stuff. It was just his personality. And he'd do all these kind of things, and so he always would find a way to make somebody laugh. And the world has lost that. He's gone now. And so I want people to know about that. Not to dwell too much on the past and the loss, but just know that this is something that we've lost. But for all the other people, all the thousands of other people who were killed in these recent wars, and then there's even more before that. But um, I think I want people to recognize that all of these lives were not lost for no good reason. It wasn't all for nothing.
Right.
There was a lot of good that was done by going to Afghanistan, specifically, Iraq too, because we were able to take the fight over there to the enemy, to the people who attacked us, and we were able to go over there, take the fight to them, so that we prevented another 9/11 style attack here in America. Because for those 20 some odd years that we were over in Afghanistan, we didn't have planes crashing into buildings and having innocent people getting killed on American soil. That just didn't happen. So we saved countless American lives, but I feel like we also saved countless Afghan lives as well over there, because we were there to kind of keep the Taliban at bay and prevent them from taking over the country and imposing their will on all of the people there. And sure, they did some bad things there, and there were people who were killed. I'm not saying that nobody was killed, but there are people, I'm confident, who are walking the earth today that may not have been had we not gone over there. But we also provided things like schools and infrastructure to the people of Afghanistan that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And so that gave a whole generation of kids the opportunity to go to school and learn what it's like to get an education, albeit not the kind of education that we're used to here in the States, but they still had an education. And now that they're older and maybe parents themselves, I know as a parent, I want better for my kids than what I ever had. And I just hope that that's something that they want too. And maybe that puts a little spark inside of them and says, you know what, if I had this education, why couldn't my kids have this too? And, maybe that's just me being optimistic and overly hopeful, but, I hope that it's, one way to look at it so that you don't feel like these lives were lost for nothing.
Yeah, I thank you for that message, Scott. And I think it's on us, the ones that survived and came back, right, to kind of carry on that mission and legacy for them, right, for the ones that who
Right.
did it. Because just like you said, their lives weren't lost for nothing, because we did make an impact out there.
Yeah.
And it's very important for us, the ones who did go out there and fought, to tell the ones who didn't, who were here, that we were protecting, like, hey, we made a difference, right? And
Sure.
our sacrifices were for naught. So
Right.
thank you for that message, man.
Yeah, and I tell a story in my book too about my grandmother. In 1968, she was diagnosed with cancer, and so she went to the doctors, did the chemo treatments and all that stuff and ended up beating cancer back then. And then about 20 years later, the cancer came back and ultimately took her life in 1989. And so the analogy that I make there uh, is that the cancer that my grandmother was fighting was like the Taliban, and she, being the patient, was like the people of Afghanistan, and the doctors were the coalition forces, the NATO troops that were going over there to fight against the cancer, the Taliban over there, right? So um, would no one would say that the doctor's efforts back in the 60s, when she first started battling the cancer, no one would say that that was all for nothing, right? Yes, sure, the cancer ended up taking her life, but it gave her about 20 years more life to live. So it wasn't all for nothing. And so I make that analogy just to say, look, we did some work and we breathed some life back into that country, and now, you know, the Taliban took back over, but those people were able to enjoy uh, a little bit of freedom while we were there. So it's not all bad. You can't look at it with all negative lenses.
Right. Um, Scott, I want to go back to the podcast and the book. Uh,
Sure.
what's kind of been, since the release of the book, and you starting the podcast 2+ years, right? What's kind of been like the most rewarding moments or experiences you've had since you started this journey?
Yeah. So with the podcast specifically, I get messages every once in a while from people who've listened to a particular episode and said that it had an impact on them, um, that it was something that helped them get through something, or get through a tough time or whatever. And so I feel like, even if it's just that one person who I've been helping with all these countless hours of work that I put into the podcast, and I know you have a podcast too, so you know what it's like to edit episodes and do all the work behind the scenes that nobody else ever sees, but it still takes a lot of time. Um, even if it's just that one person that I helped, then I feel like I'm doing my job. And so like that type of thing to me is rewarding. And like I said before, I think it's important for people to find their new sense of purpose after leaving the military. And for me, this is it. This is a thing that I do to give back and to help out the people um, who may be struggling on their own. And so I don't want people to just be there struggling. I want them to thrive and and get over whatever obstacles they're going through. And those little messages that I get every once in a while just tell me that I'm on the right path. I'm doing something good. And so it gives me a little bit of renewed uh, energy to keep going and to keep on doing this podcast. Um, and with the book, the same thing. I mean, I get so much good feedback from it, where people saying that they didn't realize some of the stuff that we had gone through, and what it was like to experience some of this stuff. And they tell me that it has changed their outlook on the military and the families who sacrifice for our country.
Yeah, I think we're just for our audience, we're talking online, Scott and I, about like the podcast and the whole purpose, the mission behind it. Like as far as like as long as we can like reach one person, right? As long as
Yeah.
it's made a difference in one person, we've done our job. And like he said, it's not like we get paid a lot of money to do these podcasts. And
No.
then obviously the amount of work that we have to do behind the scenes just to get it out to the audience. But like you, Scott, I mean, like I just enjoy. I'm more of an introvert in person, but I just enjoy listening to stories and listening to other people talk about their stories, and and if me having this podcast, being able to help them share that story, I think that's for me like satisfaction enough. So
Yeah, for sure. And I'm in the same boat. I'm pretty much an introvert too in person. These conversations that we have, I'm good with these kind of conversations, knowing that afterwards it's not like I'm going to be standing in a big crowd of people where I have to go talk to the next person, like at a networking event or something like that, where you're in a room of 100 people, and now, okay, I'm done with this conversation, now I'm going to go talk to that next person. I'm going to be there talking to someone for 6-7 hours. It's like, oh, shoot me now, because like that's just too much for me. Um but but the thing is, whenever I'm on the podcast, I'm talking to other veterans, and uh we start talking, and we may never have spoken face to face before, but by the end of the conversation, it's like we're old friends. Like it's just this weird connection that we have in the military, where we're able to just kind of pick up and go. We kind of speak the same language,
right,
and
right.
we a lot of times it really does feel like I just made a brand new friend after having these conversations. So it's really cool to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. For Scott, for our audience that might be interested in, you know, maybe having their own podcast or maybe one day writing a book, right?
Yeah.
Obviously with anything that you start with, there's a lot of bumps in the road when you first start out.
Right.
What are some steps that you can kind of provide for our audience who might be interested in writing a book or starting their podcast? What are some of advice and steps that you can kind of give them in that
Yeah, I
pursuit?
think that I think the first step is to just get started with whatever it is that you want to do. It doesn't have to be as clean and polished as you want it to be. Nothing's ever going to be perfect when you first start. So just start. Um, if if you don't want to, if you're not sure how you're even going to like doing a podcast, if you have a voice recorder on your phone, on your iPhone or Android phone or whatever, you can probably just record yourself talking using the voice recorder on there without any fancy equipment. So you don't even have to spend any extra money to buy,
Like
you know,
bare
these
minimum, right?
bare minimum. Just, I mean, just to say, okay, is this something that you want to do? Is this something that you're going to be able to maintain? Because if you go out and buy, a few $100s of microphones and cameras and lights and all this other stuff that you end up accumulating by doing these podcasts. And then you do 4 or 5 episodes and you're like, you know what? This isn't really for me. You're just blowing all that money for nothing. And that's kind of a waste. So, if it's a financing that's holding you back, just start with what you have. Use that. And if it seems like that's something that you want to do and you want to continue, okay, fine, then go upgrade your microphone. Start with that. And then, start upgrading, different little pieces here and there. So it's not like a huge financial burden all at once. The microphone I have is not super expensive. It's but it does the job. It sounds fine. It's not your high end studio quality microphone, but it's a clear enough sounding microphone that it works. So don't worry about getting the latest and greatest, best sounding and everything. Like, you don't need that crap. And then make sure it's something that you're passionate about. Whether it's a book or a podcast, make sure it's something that you're passionate about, because you're not going to want to do it too much if you're not passionate about it.
Right.
If it's something that it's like a chore, like you have to, like you're going to work and it's a job that you don't really particularly enjoy, that's the way you're going to treat it. And then you're going to try to avoid it because it's like, well, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore because I'm not all that passionate about it. And it's not going to be all that long lived. So find something that you're passionate about and stick with that. As far as writing a book, you're going to go through about 1,000 iterations of the book. So just start writing something. Like,
Right.
it's not that big of a deal. And I ended up going the self-published route, where I published through Amazon for my book. And I liked doing that a little bit better because going the traditional published route, going through a publishing house and everything, it takes so much longer to get your book out there. They, after you submit it to them and they accept it, it could take sometimes up to a year for them to get the book on store shelves. And I was like, you know what? This book's done. It's ready. I just want to get it out there. I don't want to have to sit around waiting for a year to let people know that this thing's been done and it's collecting dust now, right? So I just wanted to get it out there. And in addition to that, you keep more of the percentage of the sale than you would if you go through a traditional publisher. So while, yeah, you may sell more copies of your book, by going through that, you're probably not making quite as much money. So if financial is a reason that you're writing the book, not that I ever had any dreams of becoming a wealthy author or anything like that, because I knew I wasn't going to make a ton of money on this. But if finances are an issue and you want to make as much money as possible, go the self-published route, because you're probably not going to make a ton of money on the traditionally published route. So I guess those are my little bits of advice for people. But if anyone is thinking of starting either a podcast or writing a book or any of that, and they have questions and they want to know what I've done or I've used or whatever, for as far as technology or any of that kind of stuff, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help people, send them in the right direction. You can get me. There's a contact form on my podcast website, thedriveonpodcast.com, or on any of the social media pages. You can send me a DM. I'm always happy to help.
Yeah, I think Scott, every time I ask that question, right, like if advice on how to start a podcast or write a book, you said it right. Like, the most important thing is just to start, just to get started.
Right.
Because in the beginning it's gonna suck, it's not gonna be great, but I think as long as you put forth the effort and put something out there, you'll never know, right? Unless you put something out there. So
Right, exactly. And if, like, for a book, for example, if you don't just get started, you're going to be staring at a blank computer screen or a blank piece of paper for a really long time, because no one's going to start it for you. So you might
right.
as well start something. Even if it's not great, you can always make changes. That's the beauty of writing your own book. You can do whatever you want with it. There's no
Right.
right or wrong answer to it. Make it be whatever you want it to be. And if you do it on the computer, that much easier, because then you can move sections around and all that kind of stuff. It's not like you committed it to ink to paper or whatever, but either way, it doesn't matter. You can still move stuff around and change things however you want it to.
So Scott, one final question before we go to our second segment here. What's one thing you want our listeners, our viewers to take away from this episode?
I want people to take away that if you think that you have been in a difficult situation and that you've tried everything to help yourself out of that situation, you just feel like all hope is lost. Trust me, it's not. Um, you've you've already survived 100% of your worst days already.
Mm.
You've done it. You've gone through the hard stuff already. Um, and if today happens to be the worst day of your life for whatever the reason is, well, guess what? The day's almost over, and you've almost survived that day too. So you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, and you'll have survived that day. Just know that there are things out there that you can do. You may feel like you're a hopeless case, but you're not. Um, there are people out there who want you to succeed, want you to thrive, and they are going to do whatever it takes to help you with that. If you're willing to let them. So I think that's a big thing is you have to be willing to accept help and seek it out when you need it, because no one's going to come knocking on your door just checking up. Hey, how's it going? Are you doing all right? Just your weekly check-in or whatever. No one's going to do that if you're not letting people know that there's something wrong. So reach out to people and get the ball rolling. There is help out there.
Yeah, I think that's the most important step. Is that first step is just
Right,
asking for help when you know you need it. So,
for sure.
all right, Scott. So going to our second segment of the podcast. So this is what I call the fast five. These are the same five questions I ask all my guests. So first question, Scott, what's one hobby you enjoy?
So I like to paint. I've been painting for a little over a year now, and it's just something that I found to relax me, and it's really enjoyable. So that's my hobby.
How long have you been doing that painting?
Yeah, a little over a year. I started actually because one of the guests on my podcast was talking about how they used it as a form of therapy,
Mm.
and how it relaxed them and brought them to be more present in the moment and everything. And I was like, I need a little bit of that in my life, so let me give that a try. And so I gave it a try, and I was like, you know what, actually this is pretty relaxing. And the first few things I painted weren't all that great, but it got better over time, and I didn't really care really about the quality of it. It was really just the exercise of going through it and doing it. But then as I did more and more, I started to get a little bit better, and I kind of enjoy it. So
As for our people that are watching the video, is that some of the artwork in the back there?
yeah, the stuff over here, that's some of the artwork that I've done. There's a few more on the other wall that you can't quite see here, um but yeah, those are some of them.
That's pretty awesome. That's
Yeah,
nice.
thanks.
So second question, Scott, if you had to choose one person to hang out with for one day, who'd it be and why?
Okay, so if I could pick a family member, um, I and this is alive or
Yeah,
dead,
anybody.
right?
Yeah.
Anybody, right? If I could pick a family member, I'd pick my brother. And the reason why is because, like I told you earlier, growing up, we looked up to the military, and then my brother joined the military, and I started looking up to him, and I was incredibly proud of him. But one thing I realized after he died was that I never told him how proud of him I was, and um, I never got. It just wasn't something we ever said. It was, I don't know why, I just never did.
Yeah.
And I would love the opportunity to be able to sit down, have a beer with him, and just tell him just how proud of him I actually was, and still am, and just get that out there so that I know that he knew, how proud I was.
Kind of like a final goodbye and just kind of just let him
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
It's yeah.
exactly.
Um, so Scott, next question. Recommend a book for our audience to read.
Yeah. So there is a guest that I had on my podcast a few months ago. Her name is Ashley Leppert, and she wrote a book called The Hurricane Within. And um, that book it talks about her. She was a Coast Guard uh, member, and she served during Hurricane Harvey during the rescue efforts with the Coast Guard. So she
Okay.
was on the helicopters that were basically picking people off of roofs and things like that during the floods and everything like that. And it's one of those things where you see it on the news, you see the helicopters flying around, you see these rescues being taking place, but you don't really realize how much goes into it and how dangerous some of the work is that they're doing. You know, they're sending down uh, people down on these wires, and there's like power lines all over the place. It's just wreckage all over the place, and you know, they very easily could get electrocuted themselves. And but they're going out there to save other people who they don't even know, that they
Mm.
don't necessarily live in that community. They're just going out there because there's someone who needs help, and they're going to do it because those people need help. And that was it was just a inspiring thing for me to see into the eyes of those rescue workers, and what actually is involved with some of these rescues that take place.
And again, that book was Hurricane Within by you said Ashley Leppert, who's a
Yes,
U.S. Coast Guard. Okay.
yes, yeah. She was on my podcast a few months ago, and you know, we had a great conversation. And she was actually after the hurricane, she was actually invited to the State of the Union address by President Trump, and she was like a honored guest. Within the first few minutes of his State of the Union address,
Mm.
he mentioned her by name specifically, which was pretty cool too, to have that kind of honor as well. You know, regardless of politics or anything like that, like you're on national television, and the
Right.
president of the United States with all of the, you know, top officials from the government are all in the same room, all standing up and giving you a round of applause. That had to have felt pretty damn good. So
Yeah.
so that's pretty cool.
Scott, next question. What's your favorite quote and why?
I think it's oh my God, I'm going to screw it up now. I had it in the back of my mind because I knew this question was coming. I'm going to totally butcher it. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. There it is. I
Yeah,
got it.
there you go.
And I tell this to my kids all the time. And the reason why I tell them this is because they'll rush through something like cleaning their room or putting the dishes away, or something like that, and they will inevitably miss something. It'll still be a mess. And they'll have to go back and do it all over again. And I tell them, if they just stopped and slowed down and did it the right way the first time, they'd be done, and they wouldn't
Right.
have to go back and do it all over again. And by the time I find out that something needed to be done, and I tell them go back and do it again, um, you know, they would have been done with the whole thing had already at that point in time, had they just done it right to begin with. So um but that it applies to more than just raising kids and stuff. Anything that you do in life, if you're rushing through things trying to get it done quick, chances are you're not going to get everything. You're probably going to miss a few things along the way, and um you're going to end up having to go back and do it again. So it's worthwhile to just take a step back, slow down, look at the whole situation or whatever it is that you're trying to do, and do it right the first time, because you'll end up getting it done a whole lot faster if you do it right the first time.
Yeah, I think we can all use that message.
Right.
um, Scott, last question here. Where do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years from now?
You know, I really hope that I am still able to give back to the veteran community in one way or another, whether I'm still doing the podcast or I'm doing something else. Um, I, I found that was something that I just really am passionate about. And I really hope that I can continue serving the military community by doing things like the podcast, or instructing people, or doing whatever it takes to help people with whatever they're going through. You know, so something like that. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. You know, a year from now will probably be still doing the podcast 5-10 years from now. Who knows? I may not still be doing the podcast necessarily, but I may be doing something else that maybe is more impactful and beneficial to the military community. So I really hope that that's where I am in those 5-10 years or so.
Maybe speaking in front of people, in front of thousands of people, and kind of just sharing your message.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of public speaking, smaller groups, maybe 100, 200 people at most. But yeah, if I can get out there and be talking to much bigger crowds, that would be great, you know?
Yeah, I think I don't know, but I just feel like for me, like I'm not really. It's one of those things that I want to, I guess like a goal. It's like something of a challenge, right? You always want to put something out there that you can kind of like
Yeah,
that's challenges you. Kind of like one of those big, hairy, audacious goals. I
right.
kind of see that with you, like maybe speaking in front of public speaking in your future. I don't know why.
Yeah, I could definitely get behind that. So I think maybe that will be one of those big goals for me is maybe I try to get out there and do a little bit more of that and uh, see if I can't make it on the big stage someday.
Most definitely, most definitely. So Scott, man, thank you for sharing your story with us. Um, Before we go here, can you share with our audience where can they support you, where can they find you, and obviously just tell them where they can get the book and where they can listen to the podcast.
Yeah, sure. Best way to find everything that I'm doing, social media and all that kind of stuff is to go to driveonpodcast.com. Has links to just about anything that you would need, where to subscribe to the podcast, where to follow it on social media, all that kind of stuff. Um, Email list and stuff like that too. The book is on Amazon, like I think I mentioned earlier. So the book Surviving Son, you can get that on Amazon. And you can also, if this was a weird thing that I never really thought about until I published the book, but people somehow they wanted my book, me to sign the book for them.
Ooh,
And so if you want a signed copy of the book, they don't have those on Amazon, but you can get that through my website as well. I'd be happy to do that and send it out to you, and get a signed copy to you as well. Um, yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess.
awesome, Scott, man. Again, I appreciate you for your time, sharing your story, and man, looking forward to hearing more about you and seeing you in that big stage one day, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right, brother. Stay in touch.
All right. We'll do.
All right, man.